Hello and welcome to Immigration Unpacked. I am Natalie Loader and I'm a partner in the immigration team at Bindmans. Today I am joined by our Head of Business Immigration, Tanya Goldfarb, and we are going to discuss some of the changes that were introduced to the sponsor guidance. Tanya and I can always talk about this for a long time,
Yes, we
but
can.
there's quite a lot of changes as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it in two parts. So this is part one of changes to the sponsor guidance, and part two will come out in a couple of weeks' time. And this just follows on from our previous podcast, which we recorded with our colleague Roshan Dykes in our employment department, because there was an introduction of requirement for sponsors to provide their sponsored employees with details about their employment rights. That was just one very small part of the change to the guidance. And Tanya and I want to take some time to go over the other new obligations which were introduced in the most recent changes. So I think what's sort of an important thing to note about these changes to the guidance is that it's showing a real turning of the screws in terms of compliance strictness, or how the Home Office are approaching sponsor compliance. And the new guidance makes for a little bit of uncomfortable reading, doesn't it, Tanya? Because it's basically saying one strike and you're out, almost. That if you make a mistake in relation to your obligations or your duties as a sponsor, if you fail to do something, or if you were unaware that you should do something and you don't do it, then it could be that your license gets suspended or revoked. And so the Home Office are basically increasing their powers and their capacities to revoke or suspend licenses. So
Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say they've given themselves really wide-ranging powers, and they have removed the element of discretion. They've also removed the element of investigation and then
mm,
suspension or revocation.
yeah. Not to say that there wouldn't be investigation in all cases, but there are times when they can receive intelligence, for instance, from other government sources, for
Agencies.
instance, HMRC, for instance,
Hmm.
and then look into it themselves and make a decision to revoke the license if they think you're not paying your workers enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I meant a notified investigation in which
Hmm.
a sponsor would then have the ability to make reps back and
Yeah.
provide documentation. But we digress.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get on to all of
We
that.
will.
But it's just more of this feeling that we've that's developed over the last few years, that you can't put your sponsorship obligations on a back burner. You must
Hmm.
see them as part of your ongoing governance. When you get given a license, the Home Office is saying, we trust you to use this license in the way that we say you have to use it. And so if you're unaware of how you have to use it, that is your fault, and we will take action against you
Correct.
if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. So it's very much the case that sponsors are in a regulatory regime with the Home Office. They must comply with the duties that they sign up to. It is a voluntary system. So the Home Office is saying, you have volunteered to be part of the system, so play by our rules. So sort of on that note, the first other major change to the guidance is that there's now a positive obligation on all sponsors to read the very, very long sponsor guidance documents. Tanya, what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, what I think is that it's an interesting departure from requiring sponsors to be familiar with and to check sponsor guidance and to observe the obligations, for example, record keeping responsibilities or reporting responsibilities. And the the beginning of one of the guidance documents notes that participation in the sponsorship scheme is voluntary and that sponsors seek membership for their own benefit. It used to be that it was more of a partnership with the Home Office in order to enable UK-based employers to sponsor overseas nationals to work in the UK. Now it's the wording indeed reflects, and I quote again, sponsors should be aware that a license is held at the broad discretion of the Home Office and can be terminated at any time. I think that the move to make the onus much more on sponsors is going to require, if sponsors aren't already, is going to require sort of a potential radical rethink of the way people approach their sponsor licenses and also use and attend to their sponsor licenses.
Yeah.
For example, there's now a strict requirement to log into the sponsor license monthly and to check the notice board. Previously, it was, I don't know that it was necessarily an obligation or a requirement, but it was certainly best practice, and that is what we advised people to do. But now there is, I suspect what will happen is that there will be a positive undertaking by the Home Office to see who has not checked
Mhm.
into their sponsor license and looked at their message board and then undertaken action.
Yeah. So I think we always would have advised that any level one user should regularly log into the sponsor
Absolutely.
management system.
Absolutely.
Um, and there's the benefit of doing that is one, you get to see the notice board, which is where the Home Office put up information about changes to the guidance. So it's going to notify you there's been a change to the guidance, you better go and check it
Indeed.
out, right? Or they might be just notifying you of something a bit more mundane, like we're going to be updating the sponsor management system over these few days and it won't be available, you know. So it gives you sort of notification if you need to do something on your sponsor management system that you should do it, you know, outside of those timeframes. But mainly, I think when level one users are logging in, they're going to log in, they're going to look at the notice board and they're going to see if there's any change to the guidance, and that's going to trigger whether or not they have to go and reread something to see what those updates
A-
are. Um,
Absolutely.
and the other reason why you should be logging regularly into the sponsor management system is because there is a positive obligation on sponsors to keep it up to date and to keep the Home Office up to date.
Hmm.
So go and look at your license summary on the sponsor management system.
Please.
Check that all the details are correct. Check that no one's changed anything without you knowing. And just make sure that you're keeping the Home Office up to date with your addresses, your telephone numbers, your contact details. It's just a reminder to keep doing that. Look at your level one and level two users.
Hmm.
Are they as you would expect them to be? Do any need to be decommissioned? Do you need to take anyone off because they've left the business? Do you need to put someone new on because you don't have you've had someone new join who requires access to sponsor management system, but you haven't granted it yet? So it's triggers to remind you to do these things. Although sponsors should be aware that they should be making updates to the Home Office. Usually it's within 10 days of any change taking place. But
10 days, or
yeah.
some there are longer time frames.
Mm,
The other point that I think is worth mentioning now in terms of all the obligations that you've just mentioned and others that we'll
mhm,
talk about is that previously the Home Office would send emails to level one users to remind them to check in. Now
mm,
I suspect that sponsors, level one users, possibly key contacts or the
mm,
authorizing officers will not receive those
yeah.
gentle prompts and
Yeah.
reminders to fulfill their obligations.
Exactly.
Um,
We had a period, didn't we? It was a few years ago now, but there was a sort of active campaign by the Home Office to
yes,
reach out to everyone with sponsor management system logins to say, our records show you haven't logged
you
in for
haven't
some
yet
time.
done
Please do
this.
log in.
Yes,
So I suppose that was the precursor
absolutely.
of this.
Yeah.
Um, and then when you are logging into the sponsor management system and you're doing your monthly check, you know, check the license details, check everything's correct, check all of your branches are, you know, properly registered, check all your level one and level two users are as they should be. And then there's also a way that you can search for all causes that have been assigned. So what you want to also be doing is just checking those causes, making sure that no one has, without your knowledge, assigned a cause to someone who shouldn't have a cause assigned to them. So that's the reason
Yeah.
really why the Home Office want you to be on top of your sponsor management system, because they want to make sure you are aware of what's going on your sponsor management system, and that you're being vigilant that no one is taking steps that you have not authorized on your sponsor
Which
management system.
which leads us neatly to an obligation that there has always been, which is that users of a sponsor license must not share their login details
Mm,
with anybody. And so if a level one user has logged in and has seen that there has been a notification or a report or an action that they were not aware of, that is then time to take stock and
mm,
assess who is in fact accessing through the SMS within your organization to ensure that there aren't whether you're calling them unauthorized or unaware
Mhm.
actions occurring, that they don't occur. And it is also very important to ensure that, in addition to all of the obligations that you mentioned, that if a sponsor note needs to be undertaken, if there's a reporting duty on an individual because, say, for example, they've taken some parental leave or they've had a salary increase,
Mhm.
all of those things, you have to remember that a sponsor note needs to be undertaken and then records need to be kept. So everything needs to tally up within your HR/people
Mhm.
management systems, not
Yes.
just within the SMS, but sort of outside in a
Yes.
broader sense.
Yes, exactly. I think a few weeks ago, Roshan and I talked about statutory sick pay and how this
Yes.
is going to increase obligations for reporting to the Home Office. Because if someone is going on statutory sick pay from day one of their illness and their
Hmm.
salary is reduced accordingly, then you must make that report through on the sponsor management system to
Absolutely.
say that this person is on statutory sick pay because it is going to impact their salary. And if the Home Office are looking at salaries being paid because they're receiving data from HMRC, which we know happens, then if
Yes.
that the because of the statutory sick pay, the salary is dipping and it goes below the minimum requirement for the visa, then
Hmm.
that could trigger the Home Office to one either investigate the company, so come for an audit or do a remote audit or ask you for documentation, or because they've got all of these new powers just to revoke or suspend licenses just following their own investigation without contacting you first to give you a chance to respond, then it could mean that your license gets revoked or suspended, and then you're on a back seat trying to get everything back in place. So these reporting requirements are really, really important. So sponsors must read the guidance, know what their sponsor reporting duties are, know what their sponsor sort of obligations are, and make sure that they've got systems in place within their organization to make sure they're
Yeah.
going to be able to meet these duties or responsibilities. I would say it's probably a good time for sponsors to get their immigration
Do a
lawyers
review.
involved, come in, do a what we call a mock audit. So
Hmm.
do a review of HR systems as they are against Home Office requirements, and check them for robustness. Make sure your processes are such that you are going to be able to meet your sponsor obligations. Okay, so that's sponsor obligations. It's always been strict, but I think it's even stricter now. Is
I'm
the
afraid
is the
so,
headline.
is the takeaway headline.
Okay, so the new guidance also has introduced some new terminology. So when you
Yes, it
sponsor an
has.
employee in the UK, there's always been a requirement that if you're sponsoring someone in the UK, that role has to be genuine. And the new sponsor
Hmm.
guidance has done away with the wording genuine vacancy and they've
Yeah.
replaced it with eligible concept.
Role.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the concept of an eligible role. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Tanya, do you want to explain how it is then that the Home Office are going to assess what is an eligible role?
Right, exactly. What they're going to assess is when, at the point that a certificate of sponsorship, the work permission documentation is assigned, excuse me, it's catching. Um,
Sorry,
the
doing it
role,
to you.
no, not at all. The role must have existed at the point that the certificate is being assigned. So, in other words, it hasn't been generated or the role hasn't been created to facilitate someone's immigration position and or status in the UK, that the eligible role requires the role holder to perform particular duties, responsibilities as they are detailed in the certificate of sponsorship. And so that may mean that actually slightly more information is now going to be need to be included in the job description section. And remember that's unless they expand it, it's still only 1,000 characters, I believe.
That makes
And
it
so
difficult. Yeah.
succinct but to the point is going to be the name of the game here. They must show that it meets all the route requirements, specifically the skill level, so at RQF level 6 or above, for generally for a skilled worker sponsorship, that the
Mhm.
salary thresholds are met, which include meeting national minimum wage requirements and working time regulations. So you can't state a salary as if it were going to be for, say, a 37.5-hour week, which is how the Home Office measures a standard working week, and that's what the salary bands are set at in
Mm,
terms of the thresholds for particular codes, and also the working time directive. So if you're assigning a certificate, but someone's actually going to be working a 40-hour week, then the salary must be prorated accordingly. It must be appropriate for the particular business. So it must be a job that's, that one would normally expect to see within an organization, such as the organization is assigning the
mm,
certificate. And we must demonstrate that the requirement for the individual is genuinely needed. So we're back to the concept of genuine, but that the eligible role is genuinely needed for the entirety of the sponsorship. So that sort of dovetails back to we're not doing something to facilitate someone's
mhm.
ability to be able to stay in the UK.
Yeah. So I think all of these concepts are not novel
They are not,
in sponsorship. They've always been there. It's just they're now codified within the
indeed.
guidance, and we can see how the Home Office are going to assess a genuine role, or what is now called an eligible role.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is laying it out there plain
Mm,
and front and center that they are taking a stricter approach to how they're going to assess when certificates are assigned. We don't yet know what that's going to look like. It may not come at the assignment of a certificate point, particularly if it's an in-country certificate where a sponsor is using their annual allocation or their in-year allocation, if they had to make an in-year allocation for their undefined certificates for those for people in the UK.
mm,
But greater scrutiny is already met at the process where a sponsor is assigning a skilled worker certificate to someone outside of the UK, because those
mm,
requests go to the Home Office anyway. So there may well be greater scrutiny built into that point. So for in-country applications, it's possible slash probable that that will then come at the visa application stage
mm. Yeah. Or it could be when you're requesting cause allocations, you will
in
need
the
to provide.
future. Absolutely.
Exactly. You just need to
Or you're
provide
doing
more
an
information about um, why it is that the business requires this role, how it fits with the business. So, to provide like a business justification for the requirement of an increase in cause allocations. For instance,
and
we've won new business, we've got a new contract, we require, X many
yeah.
COS for workers who are working X job. Yeah.
I mean, certainly we see those sorts of requests come in on in-year cause allocation
Mm,
requests when a sponsor has used up their annual allocation and is requesting and requiring additional cause to assign throughout the year. Even when what would previously, say a couple of years ago, have been sufficient information because perhaps there isn't a particular individual that's been identified, but the business knows that they have a need in 3 months or 4 months' time because they're on a recruitment drive. We are seeing requests for additional documentation, additional evidentiary pieces, that job adverts that have been placed, of further justifications for why a sponsor needs a particular number of certificates. So
mm,
I think it's a pattern. We have been talking about this increased pattern over the past couple of years, but it's all seemingly sort of coming together in a great big fell swoop of a
mm,
whole ranch, a branch rather, of documents that were updated all at the same time, and these new obligations coming into play one after another in very quick succession. So throughout March, April, with the pay period requirement.
Okay, and then just sort of leading from that, the guidance was also updated to say that the cause must reflect the job in practice. Again, this has always been the case, but it's now being set out very clearly in
Yes.
guidance.
I
It's
mean, it's
been sitting
explicit
there.
rather than implicit,
Yes,
right?
exactly. So part of the genuine or eligible role is that the role stated on the certificate of sponsorship is the role that the applicant is or the migrant is undertaking for the company in the UK. I think this new requirement also then sort of extends that to if there's a change in job duties and the migrant starts doing an altered job. So it could be similar to the one they're doing, but there's increased responsibilities. You must update the Home Office with
Yes,
their
you must.
duties. But most importantly, if those duties change the role so much that the job then moves into a new occupation code,
Yeah,
then before they can move into that job, you've got to assign a new certificate of sponsorship and they need to make what's called a change of employment skilled worker
yeah,
application to the Home Office.
yeah.
So to get permission to do that new job because it's gone into a different occupation code. So we see this sometimes even where people are promoted internally or they're moving within
Hmm.
through different departments internally. That sometimes without the sponsor really thinking about it too much because it's someone that they're sponsoring already, they're still working for the sponsor. But if the job changes so much that it moves into a different occupation code, then you must assign a new certificate of sponsorship. And the Home Office are basically saying, we'll revoke your license if you don't
If you
make that.
don't.
So we're not interested anymore if you didn't realize you had to make that application. If, in fact, even though, even if you would have made that application, there wouldn't actually have been any material changes in terms of the salary would have remained the same and they're still being paid the right salary. It is still an eligible
Hmm.
role which can be sponsored. The Home Office will say no because that is not the job you have declared on the certificate of
On the
sponsorship. It's not the
certificate.
job they're doing. Yeah. And so we see this, or I've seen it anywhere, for instance, in some care clients where they might have had someone who's sponsored as a care worker. They then get promoted to senior care worker, but that is a different occupation code. The salary is the same, the duties are slightly different, but the occupation code is different. And so the Home Office will now take a zero tolerance approach to where
Yes.
you haven't done that new application.
It's a harsh new dawn, really.
Mm,
And I think it is going to require, as we have discussed, both here and previously, increased vigilance of HR departments and those responsible for accessing and those that do then access their
mm,
licenses to have ever increasing oversight and getting deep down into the weeds of what this really means, because having a sponsor license revoked is not just impactful for a business, but it's impactful for sponsored workers and their families who may also have visas as dependents, who may also be working in the UK and contributing. So the ramifications may well be manifestly sort of rippling out, unfortunately. Um,
mm,
I think it's important for sponsors to take note of not just the duties to report, but the timelines in which to report, because they are not particularly generous. It's
mm,
for many of them, it's 10 working days. So all of the ones that we've discussed above are mostly 10 working days, which is 2 working weeks. It's
mhm,
not a long time, particularly if retrospectively somebody is promoted and they're promoted internally, but HR aren't notified and until, 2 months later, and actually there's a bump in pay and then
mhm.
there's a dawning realization. So it's going to require greater transparency, um,
Yes. And more connectiveness, more
and more
joined up
absolutely more
processes. Yeah.
connectivity, so
Yeah.
that teams who are responsible for managing the license are kept in the loop much more by the departments that feed into them.
So I think we'll stop there. Thank you, Tanya, for your
Perfect. Thank
insights.
you.
And please do join us in a couple of weeks for part two of changes to the sponsor guidance.